Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I know you're expecting the Everything in Bloom video. It will come. I'm just hoping the day is going to brighten up a bit. You've just got one of those dull, drizzly days again. And with light levels low, I can't do my blooms justice with this camera. It does the best it can, and it's quite good. But it can do better given that extra light. So maybe later in the day, and the time of the day that I do that is not important as long as I get it posted today. So I'll get on to that. But I've had quite a few people asking about controlling their environment, and this would be important, like if you just got a new greenhouse or something or other, and you'd kept your orchids in the house and you were thinking of moving some out to the greenhouse, some or all, whatever, yeah. Now a greenhouse will give you lots of good things, but there are some downsides. First of all, it's not part of your house, so you've got to go out there. You've got to get off your sorry whatnot and go out there to do things. Yeah. And when it's pouring with rain and you're going to get soaking wet getting to the door and getting in there, it can be a bit daunting. Now I'm lucky because this is a halfway house. It works like a greenhouse most of the time, but it's still part of my house. And to get in here, I open this huge door, which is almost half of one of the walls. So I can borrow things from the house. Things like heat. Because I don't want my house being freezing cold, because it's where I live. So, you know, there are times when I can open this door and raise the temperature out here without any additional cost whatsoever. So I borrow heat. And certainly during the winter months it saves on the bill of the electric heater that's designed purposely for this place. So like certainly in the spring, like now, my heater's hardly coming on, because when I go to bed I open the big door a bit and let the residual heat out of the house into here. Well, with a greenhouse you can't do that. It's a separate entity. You're gonna need a power supply. You're gonna need some gadgets, so you're gonna need power. And therein lies your first problem, getting power from your house to your greenhouse safely. And if you want to be pedantic, to precise regulations. Don't take too much notice of them. Who the hell is going to come round and inspect my electrics? The only time that's ever going to happen is if the house is sold, which will come one day. Anyway, gadgets. You need to know what your minimum and maximum temperatures are without being there. Yeah? Well, let's start with gadget number one. 5 or 6 quid on eBay. Yeah? It gives you, it's got a memory function, so at the moment out here it's 20 degrees or just over C. I don't muck about with the old-fashioned stuff. And it's at 71% humidity. It's also coming up to 10 o'clock in the morning. You even get a clock. And these are 5 or 6 quid on eBay. You know, it's a throwaway item. If you get water on it through these little grills, you will mess it up and you'll need to throw it away and go and get another one. But they last forever if you don't get them wet. And they have a memory function. Yeah, so the max that it's been in here since I last reset it is 27 degrees. The sun must have been out that day. And it's been down to 15.5 degrees at some point. Yeah? So if you had this in a greenhouse sitting there and you went out and checked each day on your memory function, you can see what's going on without being there. It stores the, you know, the information you need. So that's gadget number one, dirt cheap, and if you fall over there's going to be trouble. That's gadget number one. So that'll sort out your minimum and maximums as far as monitoring them is concerned. They're great little gadgets these are, I'm saying dirt cheap. And then the other little gadgets I use are cheap and cheerful, made in China, and if you want to get them cheap on eBay, get them from China. And okay, they'll take 2 or 3 weeks to arrive, but you save on somebody else having already paid to get them to whichever country you live in, and then make a profit and sell them on to you. So if you want them cheap and cheerful, get them from where they're made. Yeah, that's like the other items. I'm going to have difficulty getting at those. If you want some automation, yeah, so if you've got a heater, if it's got its own thermostat on it that's reliable, then you have a self-contained unit. and you can provide heat when your temperature drops below a certain range. Yeah, that's good. So that's your heater sorted out. If you want a bit more control, like I do, because I want it precise, this is my little fan heater. It will oscillate, but when it does that, it makes a funny squeaking noise, so I don't let it oscillate. Now see, this has got a little thermostat on it, but there's no temperature range on there. So to me, that's not precise enough. It's got settings on it. You know, this is 1 kilowatt, 2 kilowatts, and 3. I don't ever use 3. That's I don't want a flamethrower on my plants. I want some gentle heat when I need it. So I only ever leave it on 2. But that puts out quite a direct amount of heat in a single direction. So some plants would be getting more, and some wouldn't be getting as many. So for me, I've wired my heater up when the heater is in here, and soon it will be coming out, and it won't come back in till late autumn. Yeah? So it's only in here some of the time, but when it's in here and it switches itself on because my temperature's dropping down, I have a thermostat separate, which I'll show you, which kicks this on. And at that particular time when the heater's in use, that heater's also wired up to that circulating fan. That's quite a big one, yeah, pushes out quite a lot of air, and that does oscillate. So at the point the heater comes on, that comes on as well, and the heat that comes out of the heater is distributed quite quickly via that fan. So I don't get hot and cold spots. It spreads that heat around very, very quickly. Both of those are on one of these cheap and cheerful little Chinese gadgets, and I think the thermostat ones are, I think they're about 11 or 12 quid on eBay. I mean, you can pay 100 quid for controls, you know, but as long as it does the job. Now these have got quite a lot of settings on them, quite honestly. You can use these to heat or to cool. Yeah, so you could have one of these to switch on your big circulating fans when the temperature rises. In other words, you could use it to cool things down. But at the moment, this controls heat. Yeah, and they have a setting where you say, if I need heat when it drops below this temperature. And then they have a differential, which is the amount you want to change it by. You know, like say I want to keep mine at a 15-degree minimum, but I only want to provide heat to take it up to 16. I have a 1-degree differential, which is the way I work this in the winter. So, as I said, they're cheap and cheerful. They are a faff to wire originally, and you do need to watch which one you get, because these are made to run on what is the UK mains voltage, which is 220 to 240 volts. They also do ones for 110 volts, and they also do 12 volt versions. Yeah, so make sure you get the right one before you plug it in, preferably. If you buy a 12 volt one and attach it to the UK mains, it will probably burst into flames. It certainly won't work. So go steady, make sure you get the right one. They are a faff to wire. If anybody ever gets one of these and scratches their head too much, just contact me. I mean, I've wired up enough of these now, I could do it in the dark. But they're great little gadgets. So that can sort out your heating and your cooling. And, you know, a couple of those could do you the world of good. Keeping your air moving around, which helps keeping things cool, is down to fans. Yeah? Unless you want to stand in the doorway and huff and puff, then you need to move your air. Moving air is quite important. Now, for a constant, gentle air movement, I use these little computer fans. These are 6-inch. The 4-inch ones in a small space would just keep that air gently moving. These are not Force 8 Gale jobs, and these are 12 volt computer fans. So you'll need some sort of adapter that plugs into whatever your mains is that reduces everything down to 12 volts. Now that's a phone charger up there with the blue light on. That's all it is. It's a phone charger, and it had a plug on the end, so I cut it off so that I could get at the wires, and that's rated at 12 volts and 3 amps. So its maximum load is 3 amps. Yeah. These little computer fans are 0.3 amps. So I can run 10 of those before I even start to load that thing and it starts to warm up. And I've got 6. So watch your electrics, don't go mad. Simple understanding, you know, what's your maximum output and are you overloading it? If you are, things will start getting warm and there is a potential fire risk. So don't go mad. Don't overload sockets. Right, so minimum air movement, but gentle and constant. So no places get stale. You don't get pockets of moister air or drier air. It just keeps it all moving around. There's 2 up there which just blow across the roof basically. Where else? There's one tucked up in the corner down there, because this area here I actually like to keep a bit cooler. And don't forget, moving air has a cooling effect. And then I've got 3 others. On each one of these shelves there is one at an angle that blows out across these shelves. These are my cool growers. I don't want them getting warm. Yeah? So that's the gentle air movement. For the big air movement, quite honestly, circulating fans are a wonder. And the bigger, the better. Why do I say that? Because the bigger they are, the more even the airflow. As you get smaller, they tend to produce more of a draft, more of a gale. So this is a big, this is a 16-inch fan, and that produces a lovely breeze on setting 1. If it starts getting too warm in here, I'll stack that up to gale force, and the leaves will be physically moving around, and that'll keep them cool. That's a 14-inch one. It's a little bit more direct. This is a nice even flow at that size. This is a little more direct. If you go down to like a 12-inch one that's quite powerful, your leaves will be bending over backwards. So that's airflow. Right, humidity. Now in a greenhouse, it depends what you've got on the floor. You know, but if you've got something suitable on the floor, like gravel beds or paving slabs or something like that, you can chuck water all over the place and you'll raise your humidity, and that helps a lot. It also has a cooling effect. The evaporative process has a cooling effect, so it helps cool the air a bit. But you need to move it. You know, just chucking the water on the floor, the humidity will slowly evaporate, and because warm air rises, it might rise up through your greenhouse. But if you've got a circulating fan, you move it around, so you get a more even humidity. And if you physically can't get enough humidity, and there are times in here when I can't, then I add foggers in, and I use these. These hold a lot of water and chuck it out at a phenomenal rate. Now, this is a more expensive item. I think these are about 35 quid on eBay, something like that. I've got 2, another one up there working at the moment, and you can see that's a lot of cool mist coming out there. I'm not quite sure why that's actually on. My setting's a bit off. But go steady with these things. The mist that comes out quite close to the unit is quite cool, and if that's falling directly on a plant, it's going to get the plant wet with a very, very cool mist, and that probably won't do the plant a lot of good. So make sure it gets into the air, not directly on plants close in when it is cool. As it disperses in the air, it naturally just takes on the temperature of the air around it, so it becomes less potential damage, shall we say. Now, they've got no control on them, these units. Well, they have, off and on. You can turn them off and you can turn them on. Yeah, now I've just turned that on. Why isn't it on? Because that one is connected up to a hydrostat. Another cheap and cheerful unit from China, bit of a faff to wire up. But again, you set the humidity that you want to maintain, and this little unit says your humidity has dropped down. I'll turn the power on. So whatever I've got connected to it turns itself on. If you get a humidifier and you want to connect it to a hydrostat, for goodness sake, make sure you get one that's got a manual on-off switch. Because if it's got a digital switch to turn it on, when the power's cut and the power comes back on, your unit won't turn on. You'll have to press the button again. Yeah? So make sure you've got something that clicks, something that physically turns it on and off. And then your hydrostat will connect the power when required, and that will automatically come on. So that's additional humidity. And just make sure you don't get it straight directly onto a plant close in when that mist is very cool. That won't do your plant a lot of good. So a couple of little gadgets. These are a bit more expensive than the thermostat versions. These come out at about 15 quid on eBay, direct from China. But, you know, they can help control and keep your humidity at the level you choose, whereas this on its own can't. It's either on or it's off. So you've got to keep your eye on it, which means you've got to be there. Yeah? So get one of these and you can walk away. And that's what I've done out here. I don't want to be here manually controlling stuff all the time. So I've got a fair bit of automation. Yeah? My humidity is automated. It's also a bonus now that we've got the posh floor and a lot of bare concrete. Well, this now works like a greenhouse, because I can chuck water all over the floor, and that raises my humidity, and with the little fans whizzing away it helps move it around and not get any very humid spots and some dry spots. It just keeps everything even. Yeah? So I can now chuck water all over the floor like I would in a greenhouse, say, raise my humidity level with no effort whatsoever, and it stops my foggers having to work so hard, which means I don't have to fill them up so often, because I use RO water in these. If you use tap water in these things and your kettle furs up, well, so will these. And if you get too much furring on the little ultrasonic unit in there, they don't work so good. Yeah, they have to be kept clean. But I use RO water in them, so I very rarely get any algae on the inside with this misted glass, darker plastic, sorry. So it stops the light getting in there so much, stops the algae growth, and because it's RO water, the algae's got no food. So it really doesn't do very well inside there, so I very rarely have to clean the inside. And what you put in here is what comes out there. So if you use very hard tap water in there, one, it'll fur the unit up and you'll have to clean it quite often, keep it working properly, and it comes out the top. So in amongst that mist is calcium deposits. So you'll get little white furry bits on your plants if it touches your plants for any length of time. Like your kettle furs up, well, eventually so will your plants. So the purest water you can use for these things without costing an arm and a leg. So that's it. Your other thing with greenhouses, the same problem I've got out here, is that at certain times of year, which in the summer, which in the UK we endearingly call the summer, if we get one, I always put that proviso in, if the sun comes out in the summer through bare glass, you will burn your plants. That's a statement. It's not open to discussion. You know, even in the UK, in the summer, that sun beats in hard through glass and you'll probably burn your plants. If not all of them, a good proportion of them. So you need some shading of some sort. So I use shade netting. I use it on the outside with an air gap between the shade netting and the glass. And that works better than it actually touching the glass because it allows airflow. And it stops the sun beating in. That also helps keep it cool. Cooler, I'll say. I mean, I can still get up to 30 degrees in here with the glass shaded. And if one layer of shading don't hack it, either get a more intense shade netting or put 2 layers on. I mean, this shade netting's rated at 50%. And when I first started out here, I used to have 2 layers on the sides and 1 layer on the roof. Well, now I've realised I can get away with only 1 layer, and my plants do better with that extra light. And in the winter time, as I head right into autumn and those day lengths come right down, the sun's weak, low in the sky, I take the whole lot off. And any sun we get comes straight in through the glass, and they love it. How do I know they love it? All my resting dendrobiums have done this year. Bar one. I don't want to brag, but all bar one, and I think that might be a young plant. So yeah, those are the sort of things that can help you when you're setting up. And I would recommend that you check your environment constantly over a period of time before you dump all your orchids in there, so that when they go in there, you know what they're going to get. And you're going to get a hell of a transition which could be deemed a shock. Coming out of a house into a greenhouse type environment is bordering on a shock. Yeah, your light levels in your house, doesn't matter how good you think they are, they're nowhere near as good as out in a greenhouse or in a sort of environment like this with so much clear glass and stuff around. So the light shock is quite possible. So I would recommend, you know, that you look out for a time when the weather's not going to be too good for a while, like, you know, a few days on the trot, and move your plants out there then. And make sure when you move them in there, you know your temperature's not going to drop down below what you want, and it's also not going to get too hot when the sun beats down. Yeah? And greenhouses, you can normally open vents or windows. You know, you've normally got roof lights where you can open up. And any ventilation that's in the roof of a greenhouse, when you open that, what does hot air do? It rises. So it goes straight up through the roof and out of those vents. But it needs to be replaced by cooler air. So the best thing to do is have vents low down, preferably on the shady side, where cooler air can be sucked in and replace that hot air. Yeah? But when that happens and that warm air goes out through your top windows, what's going to go with it? Your humidity. So yeah, greenhouses have their pluses, but they have their minuses. And this grow room is a halfway house. It's half greenhouse and half not. And the bit that makes it not a greenhouse is the fact that it's attached to the house. And for me, it's a real bonus, because as I'm walking around my house, I've got two huge patio doors here that when they're clean, I can see my plants without even coming out here. So they're always on view. I mean, most of my time spent in the lounge, with some time in the kitchen when I can't see my plants. I do need to eat and repot. But anyway, that's just a bit of advice on setup. You need to know your minimum and maximum temperatures, and if they're out of the range you want to achieve, then you're going to need some gadgets to deal with it. Heaters for when it's cold, fans to get that flipping warm air moving around, and you will need to keep your humidity at a reasonably suitable level. Most orchids do well with 50% humidity or above. Some of them need a lot more. Well, if you can't provide it, don't get those orchids. Yeah? Choose your orchids to suit your environment. But when you set up, don't put your plants in there till you're sure everything's sort of where you want it, or as near as you can get it. Nothing's ever perfect, is it? But you get as close as you can. So what's your minimum temperatures, especially if you've got warm growing orchids, and what's your maximum? You get up above 30 degrees and your plants are getting stressed. Yeah? And if you've got 30 degrees C and very little air movement, you've got more stress. Yeah? So the warmer it gets, the more airflow you need. And that airflow takes the hot air off the leaves. Yeah? Keeps it moving. It's only like you fanning your face with your hand. It's exactly the same principle. So have a go at that lot. I mean, some of that information is useless to a lot of people, but for somebody thinking of setting up a place specifically for their orchids, i.e. a greenhouse or converting a conservatory, which is what I did out here, yeah, you need some controls. You need to take control of minimum, maximum temperatures, get some airflow and control your humidity. And it can be done relatively simply, and it can be automated. And when it's automated, you don't have to be there. Especially if you're working. You can't be there, can you? You've got to go to work and earn a living. Otherwise you don't eat. You don't get money for new orchids. So anyway, just a bit of advice on gadgets and a look at some of mine. I can't recommend these enough. I mean, I don't even know the company that makes them, so I'm not bragging about the company, I'm just bragging about the little gadget. It's a little square gadget, it's even got a pull-out stand, and you get a minimum and maximum, which you can reset every day if you want, you know. And as I say, it gives you your current temperature, your current humidity, and the time. And for 5 or 6 quid, come on. I mean, I've got 3 of those. One in the house, one out here, and my daughter's got the other one where she grows her orchids, so she can keep her eye on things. So yeah, a few gadgets. These little these Chinese thermostats are about 10 to 12 quid direct from China. Say they're a faff to wire up, but the actual menu system works quite nicely. And the humidistats, which look almost identical, again a bit of a faff to wire up initially, but they simply control whatever you connect to them, you know. And in my case, I've got a fogger connected to it. So there you go, just a bit of setup information for people who are starting a place for their orchids from scratch. And I know a lot of people never did that. They got a couple of orchids on a windowsill, then a couple more, then they took over the dining room table, then they took over the bedroom windowsills, and they haven't even got one place for all of their orchids. So trying to control all of those separate places is, you know, it can be quite a big deal. But a house environment does tend to stay a little static because of the humans in it. You probably don't get silly low temperatures, so you don't have to worry about that. But you will suffer with lower humidity, and you might want to do a little bit of something about that. You know, humidity trays help a bit, not a lot, but they help some, and every little helps. Foggers in a home, don't forget you're not only keeping the air around your orchids moist, you could be getting your curtains moist and your wallpaper and your furnishings, and you'll get green mould growing all over the house. But your orchids are great. So take care, you know, obviously a home environment. It's the home and the people first and the orchids second. And you do the best you can. So a couple of gadgets for getting things going and an amount of automation. But any automation is going to require power. And make sure your power source is safe. I won't say mine is, but it's as good as I can get it. If I use sprayers and things in here and splashed water around, this could be classed as a dangerous environment, but I don't. So for me it's safe. You know, an electrician would have a nightmare in here. But I don't get any of my electrics anywhere near any water. The most water they ever get near is when the humidity's higher. And I don't ever let my humidity get up to the point of condensation forming, i.e. 100% humidity. Because that condensation would also be all over my plants and my new growths. No, 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 no. I don't get my plants wet, and I don't get any water splashing around anywhere but on the floor. So for me, out here, the electrics are safe. Yeah, but be careful with electrics. They can cause you nasty shocks and potential fire risks. So do it safely. Yeah, be safe. Okay, see you next time. You know me, I always forget something. This is not far off a sealed unit, apart from when I opened the door. Yeah. The window on it was quite rotten, and if you opened it, it was liable to drop the glass on the floor, so it was of no use. The door does never get opened. Yeah, it's locked shut. Yeah. So another way of sucking hot air out is to get an extractor fan. And when you choose an extractor fan, you need a decision. You've got the volume of air you've got in your unit, and these things shift an amount of air. Yeah, so you've got to get a balance. Now when I started, I had a 6-inch extractor and it wasn't doing the job, so I got an 8-inch one. And although that doesn't sound much bigger, the amount of air that sucks out is quite phenomenal. So I can change the temperature in here quite dramatically. So I sacrificed my window, put a wooden panel in and put an extractor in. And that's got like a louvered vent on the outside, which when the fan switches on, it opens up and lets that hot air out. if you're going to try and suck hot air out, where does hot air congregate? Near the roof. So if you're going to have an extractor fan, it needs to be as high as possible. Now if you've got a glass structure, a greenhouse, fitting one of them is a faff, because it's going to have to either fit to a glass panel and you'd have to cut holes in glass and stuff like that, or you could replace one panel with wood, and then you can fit your extractor. Well, if you're sucking the air out, the whole idea is to replace it with something cooler. Yeah, so right down buried in there that you can't see because it's on the outside is an extractor fan that works in reverse. So it's on the outside of the greenhouse and it sucks cool air in, and the louvered vents on the inside. Yeah, so I don't get a cold draft all the time. It sort of snaps shut when the fan's not on, and they come on together. So that's round the shady side, as low down as I can get it, and because the fan is on the outside of the structure, it could get rained on and get wet. So it lives in a little house. I had to make a little house for it to keep the rain off. It's like a little bird nesting box without a front on it. It's got a sort of sloping roof and sides to it, and it stops it getting wet. Water and electrics are just no good. That's also an 8-inch fan. So they're controlled by one of these little thermostats again. Yeah, so when the temperature gets to a prescribed point, that thing fires up and starts sucking out that hot air, and the other one fires up and sucks in hopefully cooler air. And the only time that doesn't work is when the outside temperature is higher than what I want it in here, because I'm sucking in warm air. And in the UK that just don't happen often. We had a hot spell last year where it did, but at least it changes the air. The downside, if you have an extractor fan, like when you open your windows in the top of your greenhouse, away goes your humidity. Yeah, and in my case, out goes the hot air with a fair bit of the humidity, and in comes cooler air at whatever humidity the outside is. And in the UK, that's never that low. You know, outside ambient humidity in the UK is very rarely less than 40%, and a lot of the time it's flipping 70–80% because it's raining like it is now. So obviously, like on a day like today, those two, the extractor and the inlet fan, will not kick in because it will not get warm enough in here to warrant them. But it's another way of changing your air and getting rid of some hot air and bringing in some cooler air most of the time. But they can be a real faff to fit in a glass structure. So I sacrificed some of my glass on the shady side. The only time the sun ever comes round this side is in the summer when the day lengths are long and it's as it's setting. So, you know, I could do without that light. I manage without it. So there is some wood panelling in here so that I could have those two fans. And they're controlled by a thermostat. You know, in the winter I seal them up with bubble wrap. Because they just are not required. But, you know, come the warmer weather, when the old sun gets in here, you know, as soon as it gets up to about 27 degrees, they kick in and they drop the temperature down probably in about 2 minutes flat. I can watch the thermometer drop when these two kick in. They move air at such a rate. And, yeah, they work for me in this, what otherwise would be an almost closed environment, apart from the door I'm stood in. So a couple of other little gadgets that you may or may not choose to, you know, for your growing space, whatever you want to call it. But in a glass structure, they're awkward to do. And there may be other ways, like opening roof vents and things like that, and opening vents along the lower edges to let cooler air in and let natural nature do its course. Warm air rises, and if you open a vent in the roof, it'll go straight out the top, but it needs to be replaced by cooler stuff from much lower down, preferably on the shadiest side of your greenhouse, because that's going to be the coolest air, you know. So that's things to think about as well. It took me a long time to get all this the way I wanted it, and you know, I think I ran a couple of years before I decided it's still getting too warm in here, even with the shade netting. I need to suck this hot air out, and I've got no windows I can open. So that's when I decided, right, we're going to suck this air out with power. And then I thought, well, actually, if we're going to suck some out, we need to get some to come in to replace it that's hopefully cooler. So that's when the inlet fan came into play. And the 2 fans I first got were both 6 inches, and they didn't do the job as well as these 8-inch ones do. I bet 10 inches would do it even better. But the bigger your fan, the more power you use, the more the cost. So, you know, again, a balancing act. So that's that lot. As I say, this isn't for everybody, and a lot of what I've just said, you know, is difficult to do if you grow in a home environment and windowsills and things like that. But some of it could be. But certainly if you have a separate place for your plants, you're going to do a lot better if you can set up some automation so that you don't have to be there all the time. You don't have to go out there in the morning and switch things on, like get your big circulating fans on because the weather forecast said the sun's going to come out and then it doesn't, and you're blasting the cold air all around the place because the sun didn't come out. So if it's on a thermostat, they only kick in at the time you want them to. And the same with any form of automatic humidity. You know, you only want it when the humidity drops. Well, you might not be there, so get a hydrostat and make it do the job for you. There we go, some gadgets and what they get used for. And as I say, most of the stuff, in fact everything that's in here, I believe came off eBay. It's where the bargains are. You go up your local store, you could be paying higher prices, but then at least you get to pick it up, pay for it and take it home straight away and don't have to wait the slow boat from China. Yeah. Okay, that's that one done then.